To remove the base enclosure, first turn the unit upside down. Use a blade or fine-edge tool to carefully pry out the small plastic screw cover at the center rear of the base enclosure. Remove the 4 Phillips No. 0 screws on the base enclosure. Use a fine-edge tool or fingernails to carefully pry back the rear covers of the 2 rear rubber feet until you can access the screws underneath. Remove the 2 Phillips No. 1 screws located under the rubber feet. Note that these screws are of different size and length than the other screws for the base enclosure. Carefully pry up the edges all around the base enclosure to remove the base enclosure from the unit. Reverse this procedure to install a base enclosure. To remove the battery, first remove the base enclosure. Detach the 7 Phillips No. 1 screws that secure the battery to the top cover assembly. Lift the battery carefully off of its motherboard connection points and remove it from the unit. Reverse this procedure to install a battery. To remove the hard drive, if installed in the unit, first remove the base enclosure, and the battery. Flip up the latch for the hard drive flat ribbon connector on the motherboard and use the blue pull tab to gently pull the connector out of its port on the motherboard. Caution: take care to use minimal force on the flat ribbon connector to avoid damaging the connector and ribbon cable. Carefully peel off the flat ribbon connector adhesive from the top cover. Grasp the rubber sides of the hard drive assembly and lift the assembly out of the unit. Carefully remove the rubber hard drive holder and reserve for the replacement hard drive. Peel back the metal foil covering the hard drive connector. Remove the hard drive cable from the drive and reserve for the replacement drive. Caution: grasp the cable by its plastic head and not the flat ribbon cable when detaching the cable. Carefully remove the metal foil from the hard drive and reserve for the replacement hard drive. Reverse this procedure to install a hard drive. To remove the M.2 SSD drive, first remove the base enclosure and the battery. Detach the Phillips No. 1 screw securing the M.2 drive in place. Tilt up the edge of the drive. Grasp the edges of the drive and remove the drive from its motherboard socket. Reverse this procedure to install an M.2 SSD hard drive. To remove the heatsink, first remove the base enclosure and the battery. Carefully peel back the tape from the heatsink over the DIMM shielding. Flip up the latch for the power audio board flat ribbon connector on the motherboard. Use the blue pull tab to gently pull the connector out of its port on the motherboard. Caution, take care to use minimal force on the flat ribbon connector to avoid damaging the connector and the ribbon cable. Carefully peel the power audio board flat ribbon connector adhesive off of the heatsink. Disconnect the fan connector from the motherboard. Untape the fan connector from the motherboard. Detach the 6 Phillips No. 1 screws securing the heatsink over the CPU and GPU on the motherboard. Carefully lift the heatsink up and off of the CPU and GPU and out of the unit. Reverse this procedure to install a heatsink. To remove a memory module from either memory socket, first remove the base enclosure and the battery. Peel back the tape from the heatsink over the DIMM shielding. Gently squeeze the sides of the DIMM shielding and pull straight up to remove the DIMM shielding. To remove the SODIMM memory module from either memory socket, gently pull out on the retaining lever located on each side of the module. The module will pop up from its socket. Caution: when handling a memory module, use care to prevent touching the memory chips on the board. Touching the chips could damage or destroy the memory. Grasp the edges of the memory module and pull the memory module out of the socket. Reverse this procedure to install a memory module. To remove the wireless LAN board, first remove the base enclosure and the battery. Make a note of the antenna assignments on the board if there are 2 antennas installed in the unit. The antenna labeled 1 should be installed in the port marked 1 on the board. Carefully detach the wireless LAN antennas from the board by pulling the antennas straight up. Caution: use care when disconnecting the wireless antenna cables from the wireless LAN board. Damaged cables or connectors can degrade notebook performance. Detach the Phillips No. 1 screw that secures the wireless LAN board to the motherboard. The screw edge of the board will release up. Grasp the edges of the board and pull it out of the motherboard socket. Reverse this procedure to install a wireless LAN board. To remove the power audio board, first remove the base enclosure and the battery. Flip up the latch for the small flat ribbon connector on the board. Use the blue pull tab to gently pull the connector out of its port on the board. Caution: take care to use minimal force on the flat ribbon connector to avoid damaging the connector and ribbon cable. Detach the two wide head Phillips No. 1 screws, securing the power audio board to the top cover. Lift the board off of its alignment pins and remove it from the unit. Reverse this procedure to install a power audio board. To remove the touchpad bracket and touchpad module, first remove the base enclosure and the battery. Detach the three Phillips No. 1 screws securing the touchpad bracket to the top cover. Lift the bracket off of its alignment pins and remove it from the unit. Flip up the latch for the touchpad module flat ribbon connector on the module. Pry up the adhesive side of the connector and gently pull the connector out of its port on the board. Caution: take care to use minimal force on the flat ribbon connector to avoid damaging the connector and ribbon cable. Detach the three Phillips No. 1 screws that secure the touchpad module to the top cover. Grasp the edges of the touchpad module and lift it off its alignment pins to remove it from the unit. Reverse this procedure to install a touchpad module and touchpad bracket. To remove the touch panel assembly, first remove the base enclosure and the battery. Open the panel fully until the unit can rest on the top cover and keyboard. Detach the LCD panel connector from the motherboard. Pull the LCD panel cable out of the cable channel on the speaker and the cable channel leading up to the hinge. Detach the wireless LAN antennas from the wireless LAN board. Detach the webcam connector from the motherboard. Pull the wireless antenna cables and the webcam cable out of the cable channel on the other side of the speaker and out of the cable channel leading to the hinge. Remove the 6 Phillips No. 1 screws that secure the hinges to the top cover. Keep your hand on the touch panel assembly as you remove the last screw. Carefully pull the touch panel assembly off of the top cover assembly. Reverse this procedure to install a touch panel assembly. To remove the motherboard, first remove the base enclosure and the battery. If you are replacing the motherboard instead of removing it for access to other system components, remove the heatsink, the wireless LAN board, the M.2 SSD drive, the DIMM shielding, and the memory modules. Note: all components may be left on the board if the motherboard is being removed for access to other system components, instead of being replaced as a component itself. Lift up the latch for the hard drive flat ribbon connector on the motherboard and remove it from its motherboard port. Caution: use care to avoid damaging the flat ribbon cable. Lift up the latch for the keyboard backlight flat ribbon connector on the motherboard and remove it from its motherboard port. Caution: use care to avoid damaging the flat ribbon cable. Lift up the latch for the keyboard flat ribbon connector on the motherboard and remove it from its motherboard port. Caution: use care to avoid damaging the flat ribbon cable. Lift up the latch for the flat ribbon connector for the touchpad module and remove the connector from its motherboard port. Caution: use care to avoid damaging the flat ribbon cable. If the heatsink is still attached to the motherboard, lift up the latch for the flat ribbon connector for the power audio board and remove the connector from its motherboard port. Peel the connector off of the heatsink fan. Caution: use care to avoid damaging the flat ribbon cable. Detach the antennas from the wireless LAN board if the board has not already been removed. Detach the DC in connector from the motherboard. Lift the latch for the webcam connector on the motherboard and pull the connector out of its motherboard port. Lift the latch for the EDP connector on the motherboard and pull the connector out of its motherboard port. Detach the speaker connector from the motherboard. If the heatsink has not been removed, remove the 2 Phillips number 0 screws for the heatsink fan. Remove the 4 Phillips number 1 screws that secure the motherboard to the top cover. Remove the 2 Phillips number 1 screws that secure the USB board to the top cover. Carefully pull the motherboard and attached USB board up and out of the unit. If you are replacing the motherboard, detach the USB board connector from the motherboard. And remove the connector and the board. Reverse this procedure to install a motherboard. To remove the USB board, first remove the base enclosure and the battery. Remove the motherboard with the USB board and other components attached. Carefully flip over the motherboard. Lift the latch for the USB board flat ribbon connector on the USB board and pull the USB board connector out of its port on the board. The board may now be removed from the motherboard assembly. Use care to avoid damaging the flat ribbon cable. Reverse this procedure to install a USB board. To remove the speaker, first remove the base enclosure and the battery. Remove the motherboard with the USB board and other components attached. Pull the EDP cable out of the cable channel on the speaker. Pull the wireless antenna cables and the webcam cable out of the cable channel on the speaker. Detach the 2 Phillips number 1 screws that secure the speaker to the top cover. Pull the speaker up and out of the top cover assembly. Reverse this procedure to install a speaker. To remove the DC in power connector, first remove the base enclosure and the battery. Remove the motherboard with the USB board and other components attached. Remove the 3 Phillips No. 1 screws for the nearby hinge. Pull up on the nearby hinge to create space, and pull the DC-in power connector out of the unit. Reverse this procedure to install a DC-in power connector. To remove the top cover with keyboard, remove the base enclosure and the battery. Remove the motherboard with the USB board and other components attached. Remove the speaker, the hard drive assembly, the touchpad module bracket, and the touchpad module. Remove the power audio board. Remove the touch panel assembly from the top cover and keyboard. Remove the DC-in power connector from the top cover and reserve for the new top cover. Reverse this procedure to install a top cover.